In the spring of 1998, 17-year-old Jenna Peterson was the kind of girl whose future seemed limitless. A talented artist with a vibrant smile, she was just weeks away from graduation. On the night of May 23rd, she went to her high school prom and was never seen again. For 25 years, her disappearance became a ghost story, a haunting mystery with no witnesses, no credible suspects, and no answers. Her family was left fractured by the silence, her community forever marked by the question of what happened to the girl who simply vanished into the night. That is, until last year, at the Oak Haven High School 25-year reunion, when the class of 1998 gathered to unseal their time capsule. They found something buried beneath the dusty yearbooks and forgotten photographs, an object that was never supposed to be there. Jenna Peterson's purple, hard-covered diary. Inside, its final pages held a chilling secret, a secret that would not only solve the quarter-century-old mystery of her disappearance, but would finally expose the monster who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The world of a 10-year-old is small and intensely bright. For Chloe Peterson, the center of that world was her 17-year-old sister, Jenna. On the afternoon of May 23, 1998, that world was buzzing with an almost electric energy. The entire Peterson house on Maple Street seemed to hold its breath, caught in the whirlwind of Jenna's prom preparations. The air was thick with the scent of hairspray and the faint, sweet smell of the gardenia corsage waiting in its plastic box on the kitchen counter. From her spot in the doorway of Jenna's bedroom, Chloe watched, mesmerized. Jenna was a blur of motion, a vibrant force of nature surrounded by scattered makeup palettes and discarded outfits. A song by The Verve played from a small CD player on her desk, the soundtrack to this perfect, hopeful moment. Jenna caught Chloe's eye in the mirror and smiled. "What do you think, Chloe?" "Too much glitter?" She turned, her silver dress shimmering under the bedroom light. To Chloe, she looked like a movie star, someone from a different, more glamorous universe who, by some miracle, lived right down the hall. "No," Chloe said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's perfect." Jenna's dream wasn't just to escape Oak Haven. It was to conquer Portland with a portfolio of graphic designs that would change the way people saw the world. She spoke of it not as a possibility, but as a future that was already written. Her confidence was a gravitational force, pulling everyone in her orbit along with her. Later, as the golden hour of the Oregon evening settled, the doorbell rang. It was Mark, Jenna's boyfriend, looking awkward and proud in his rented tuxedo. Jenna's parents fussed and beamed, cameras flashing, capturing the scene for a photo album that would one day become a collection of evidence. As Jenna walked towards the front door, she stopped and turned back to Chloe, who was standing on the bottom step of the staircase. She leaned in, her perfume smelling of vanilla and ambition. "Don't let Mom and Dad make you go to bed too early," she whispered conspiratorially. "I'll tell you everything tomorrow." Then she straightened up, gave Chloe a quick, definitive wink that was just for them, and walked out the door into the rest of her life. It was the last time Chloe would ever see her. The next morning, the house on Maple Street was different. The silence was the first thing Chloe noticed. It was a heavy, unnatural quiet for a Sunday morning, broken only by the low murmur of her parents' voices drifting up from the kitchen. Jenna's car, the old blue sedan she loved, was still parked in its usual spot by the curb, but the house felt empty. Chloe crept out of her room and peered down the hall. The door to Jenna's room was ajar. She pushed it open. The silver dress was gone, but everything else from the day before was still there. The makeup, the open CD case on the desk. The bed was perfectly made, untouched. A cold, strange feeling began to crawl up Chloe's spine. From the top of the stairs she could hear her father's voice on the phone, tight and controlled. "Mark, just think. Was there anyone else she was supposed to meet? Anyone at all?" A pause. No, we're not accusing you. We're just worried." Her mother was pacing the kitchen, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a fear that was quickly eclipsing her hope. Chloe watched her mother hang up the phone after another call, this one to Jenna's best friend, Sarah. Her face, when she turned to her husband, had crumpled. The denial had finally shattered. "She's not with Sarah," she said, her voice a fractured sound that didn't seem to belong to her. "She never came home." Chloe didn't need to hear another word. She saw the truth in the way her father's shoulders slumped, in the way her mother's hands began to tremble. This wasn't a case of a teenager staying out too late. This was a tear in the fabric of their world, a deep dark rip that was growing wider with every passing second. She backed away from the stairs, retreating into the hallway's shadows as if the darkness could hide her from this new, terrifying reality. Jenna wasn't just late. Jenna was gone. A little while later, a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a family friend or a neighbor. It was a police cruiser. Its lights weren't flashing, but Chloe could see them, dormant and waiting. Behind the glass, the sight of that car, so official and out of place on their quiet street, was the final confirmation. Their private, frantic worry was about to become a public nightmare. From her bedroom window, 10-year-old Chloe Peterson watched the two officers walk up the pathway to her front door, their arrival marking the precise moment her childhood ended and the long, cold desert of uncertainty began. The first week after Jenna's disappearance was a blur of organized chaos. The house on Maple Street became a command center of grief. Police officers moved with a heavy-footed purpose through rooms that once echoed with Jenna's laughter. Neighbors brought casseroles that sat uneaten on the counter, their kindness a helpless gesture against a monstrous void. 10-year-old Chloe learned to make herself small, to become part of the wallpaper. She watched from the periphery as detectives interviewed her parents, their questions like stones dropped into a well of sorrow. The lead investigator, a tired, overworked detective named Miles Corbin, had a default theory for cases like this. He saw a pretty, popular girl a week from graduation, and he saw a runaway. He'd ask the same questions over and over. Was she unhappy? Was she having problems with her boyfriend, Mark? Could she have been hiding a secret life? The questions felt like accusations, tarnishing the memory of Jenna while she was still just missing. Mark was questioned for hours, his teenage grief twisted into suspicion until his alibi proved unshakable. The police had cleared him, but the damage was done. Hope began to curdle into a bitter resentment. One afternoon, a different kind of visitor came to the house. It was Mr. Alistair Finch, Jenna's advanced placement literature teacher. He stood in the living room, his hands clasped behind his back, a portrait of solemn concern. Chloe watched him from the shadows of the hallway. "Jenna was, a once-in-a-generation mind," Mr. Finch said to her parents, his voice smooth and practiced. "Her essays were insightful, mature beyond her years. The world is poorer for the loss of such a light." He spoke of her potential, her talent, her future. He was everything the detectives were not, eloquent, empathetic, and respectful of her memory. He was a pillar of comfort in their collapsing world. But as Chloe watched him, she felt a flicker of something else, an unidentifiable wrongness, a coldness in his eyes that didn't match his warm, sorrowful words. It was a child's intuition, easily dismissed, but it was a feeling she would never forget. The weeks bled into months. The search parties, once 100 strong, dwindled to a handful of loyal friends. Then, to just Jenna's father, walking the same wooded trails until the snows came. The vibrant yellow ribbons tied around the oak trees in town faded to a pale, ghostly white before fraying and disappearing altogether. The news vans packed up and moved on to the next tragedy. Oakhaven tried to forget because remembering was too painful. But the Petersons couldn't. The tragedy hollowed them out from the inside. Jenna's mother retreated into a fragile world of silence, while her father poured his energy into a desperate, one-man investigation that led only to dead ends and heartbreak. The house on Maple Street became a museum of loss, and in that silent museum, Chloe grew up. She navigated the hallways of middle school and then Oakhaven High, the same halls her sister had walked. She was no longer just Chloe. She was Jenna Peterson's sister. The question was always there in people's sympathetic, curious glances. She learned to deflect it, to build walls around herself. She ate lunch alone. She excelled in her studies with a quiet, fierce determination, as if academic success could somehow balance the scales of her family's loss. Her sanctuary was Jenna's bedroom. It had been left exactly as it was, a perfect time capsule of 1998. Chloe would sit on the floor for hours, running her fingers over the spines of Jenna's books, reading her notes in the margins, trying to find a clue that everyone else had missed. She was trying to find her sister in the artifacts she'd left behind, hoping to understand the person she was becoming before her future was stolen. Years passed. Chloe graduated from high school, her own ceremony a shadow of the one her sister never had. She went to college, but she stayed in-state, unable to move too far from the epicenter of her family's pain. On the day that would have been Jenna's 25th birthday, Chloe's father opened a bottle of wine at dinner and raised his glass. "To Jenna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Her mother simply stood up and walked out of the room, the sound of her bedroom door closing like a final verdict. Chloe sat in the ringing silence, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on her. The official investigation had long since ended. Detective Corbin, retired a few years after the case, went cold, his file on Jenna Peterson relegated to a cardboard box in a dusty archive room. In that file, a single line on a supplemental report went unnoticed. It was from an interview with one of Jenna's classmates, who mentioned that Mr. Finch seemed almost obsessed with Jenna, that he always kept her after class to talk. Corbin had dismissed it at the time as teenage drama, a simple case of a teacher recognizing a gifted student. The file was closed. The world moved on. But for Chloe, now a young woman standing in the doorway of her sister's bedroom, time had stopped. The silence left behind by Jenna's absence wasn't empty. It was a living presence, a constant roar in her ears, demanding an answer to the question that had shaped every moment of her life for a quarter of a century. Where did you go? 25 years is a long time. It's long enough for wounds to scar over, for memories to soften at the edges, and for hope to finally quietly give up. For Chloe Peterson, life had settled into a quiet routine, a fragile peace built over the ruins of her childhood. And then, on a Saturday night in May of 2023, the phone rang. The evening had started like any other. Outside, the Oak Haven High School gymnasium was alive with the sounds of forced nostalgia. The class of 1998, now in their early 40s, were gathered for their 25-year reunion. They wore name tags on sensible outfits, shared pictures of their children, and laughed about teachers who had long since retired. Jenna's best friend, Sarah, now a tired but cheerful mother of two, was the event's lead organizer. As the night wound down, she took the microphone for the main event. "And now," she announced, her voice echoing slightly, "the moment of truth. Let's go see what our 17-year-old selves thought was important enough to bury for a quarter of a century." A small crowd followed her out to the school's courtyard, to a small patch of grass marked by a simple, weathered plaque. A pair of groundskeepers dug into the earth, and soon their shovels hit the hollow clang of metal. They heaved the rusty sealed box out of the ground. It looked small, an insignificant coffin, for the hopes of an entire graduating class. Back inside, they pried the lid open. A musty smell filled the air. Sarah, wearing white gloves, began pulling out the artifacts, one by one, announcing them to the laughing crowd. A ticket stub from the movie, a troll doll with bright pink hair, a newspaper clipping about the new Apple iMac. It was a perfect, innocent time capsule of the late 90s. Then her hands touched something at the bottom of the box that wasn't on the inventory list. It was hard, rectangular, and wrapped in a faded plastic bag. She pulled it out. It was a book, a purple, hard-covered diary. Sarah froze. The laughter and chatter around her seemed to fade into a distant hum. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew this diary. She had seen Jenna writing in it 100 times. She knew the little silver lock now broken. It was the confidant, as Jenna had called it, her most private, secret possession. And it was the last thing on earth Jenna would have ever volunteered for a public time capsule. The phone's ringing sliced through the quiet of Chloe's apartment. It was a landline, a relic she kept mostly for her parents. She answered, her voice hesitant. "Chloe?" It was Sarah. Her voice was thin, trembling. "It's me. Are you sitting down?" Chloe's entire body went cold. "Sarah? What's wrong?" "We opened the time capsule," Sarah said, her words rushing out in a torrent of disbelief. "We found something. Chloe, it's Jenna's diary. It was in the box." The drive to the school was a 10-minute trip that felt like an eternity. Chloe's hands were slick on the steering wheel. A quarter of a century of carefully constructed calm was unraveling inside her. It couldn't be real. It was a mistake, a cruel joke. But the terror in Sarah's voice had been genuine. And beneath Chloe's own terror, a single dangerous spark of hope began to glow, threatening to burn down everything. When she arrived, the party was over. The gymnasium was nearly empty, save for Sarah, her husband, and 2 uniformed police officers. The air was thick with a new kind of silence. Sarah held up a large, clear evidence bag. Inside was the purple diary. Its cover was slightly warped, but it was unmistakable. As Chloe took the bag, her fingers trembling the impossible. Nature of the discovery settled over the room. This wasn't just a lost item. It was a piece of evidence from a crime scene that had never been found. Jenna was fiercely private. She documented her entire life in that book. Its presence in that box was a fundamental contradiction, a clue that screamed for attention. It meant that on that night, 25 years ago, someone else had possession of that diary. Someone who knew Jenna wasn't coming back. Someone who needed to hide it. But for some reason, couldn't bring themselves to destroy it. And they had hidden it in the one place nobody would think to look until it was too late. The case was no longer cold. A ghost from 1998 had just whispered a new clue into the present day. The news of the diary's discovery sent a shock wave through the old, dormant case. Within 48 hours, the file, thick with 25 years of dust and failure, was transferred from the county archives to the Oregon State Police headquarters in Salem. It landed on the desk of Detective Amanda Rossi. Rossi was a specialist in the art of listening to ghosts. As the head of the cold case unit, she worked with evidence that had been mishandled, memories that had faded, and trails that had vanished decades ago. She wasn't like Detective Corbin from the old days. Her approach wasn't built on hunches and theories. It was built on data, DNA, and a relentless patience. As she opened the file, she knew the purple diary wasn't just a clue. It was Jenna Peterson's final testimony, and Rossi was determined to hear every word. Her first call was to Chloe. The meeting took place in Rossi's clean, well-lit office, a world away from the grim, wood-paneled rooms of the Oak Haven police station. Chloe remembered from her childhood. Rossi was direct, her eyes holding a mixture of empathy and professional intensity. "Chloe," she began, leaning forward slightly, "I've read the original file. I know what your family went through. I'm not here to offer you false hope. I'm here to offer you a fresh start. But I need you to walk me through it. Not what the police reports say, what you remember." Chloe was guarded. She had played this role before, the grieving sister, the keeper of memories. She had learned to protect the story of her family from the clumsy hands of outsiders. She recounted the basic facts of the night, her voice steady, almost robotic. Rossi listened patiently. When Chloe finished, the detective didn't make a note. He just watched her. "That's the timeline," Rossi said gently. "Now tell me about Jenna. What did she love? What made her laugh? Who was she when nobody else was looking?" The question caught Chloe off guard. For the first time, a detective was asking about Jenna the person, not Jenna the victim. A small crack appeared in Chloe's armor. Meanwhile, the diary itself was under forensic examination at the state crime lab. Technicians photographed every page, analyzed the ink, and carefully dusted the cover for prints. They paid special attention to a small circular sticker from a local bookstore on the back cover. It was a sticker from a shop that had closed down 20 years ago. Using a specialized tool, a technician carefully peeled it back, and underneath preserved from time and touch, was a single, partial fingerprint. 2 days later, Detective Rossi called Chloe again. This time she handed her a thick binder. Inside were high-quality scanned copies of every page of the diary. The original can't be handled, Rossi explained. But her words, I believe they belong to you. Read it, see if anything gives you a name, a place, a feeling, anything. That night, Chloe Peterson did what she had been waiting 25 years to do. She sat down to listen to her sister's voice. She opened the binder, and the world fell away. The first pages were a burst of familiar teenage life, entries about classes, complaints about her parents, giddy excitement about prom. Chloe smiled through her tears, recognizing the sister she idolized. But as she read on, the tone began to shift. In the winter of 1998, a new figure entered the diary's pages. He was never named, only referred to as him, or sometimes F. The entries became more secretive. There were mentions of meetings after school, of gifts, a book of poetry, a single perfect rose left on her car's windshield. Chloe's heart grew heavy. This was a side of Jenna she had never known, a secret life hidden behind her confident smile. The confident loops of Jenna's handwriting grew smaller, tighter. The entries became confused, then troubled. Chloe felt a wave of nausea. This wasn't a story of a teenage crush. It was a story of manipulation. She was reading the words of a girl who was in over her head, being isolated and controlled by an older, more powerful person. The image of the perfect, untouchable Jenna shattered, replaced by the reality of a vulnerable 17-year-old walking into a trap. The final entry was, dated the afternoon of the prom. Chloe closed the binder, her body trembling with a mixture of grief and a new white-hot rage. The diary had taken her perfect sister away and replaced her with a real, terrified girl. And that girl needed a champion. The next day she was back in Rossi's office. Her eyes were red, but her voice was firm. It was her teacher, Chloe said, her voice shaking with conviction. It has to be. Detective Rossi slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a forensic report. We found a partial print on the back of the diary, she said. It doesn't match anyone in the system with a criminal record. It doesn't match your sister, or your parents, or the boyfriend. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. But it does give us something to compare against. The diary has given us a ghost to hunt. Chloe looked at the detective, and for the first time since she was 10 years old, she felt the ice of uncertainty begin to thaw, replaced by the fire of purpose. The investigation wasn't just about finding a body anymore. It was about getting justice for the real Jenna, the girl in the pages of the diary. The hunt had begun. With the diary as their map, Detective Rossi and her team began to hunt a ghost in the past. Their focus was singular, Alistair Finch. They dissected his life from 1998 with forensic precision, pulling yearbooks, teaching schedules, and personnel files from dusty archive boxes. For the first time, Finch wasn't being seen as a respected educator, but as a potential suspect in a murder investigation. Their first official visit to him was on a crisp autumn afternoon. Finch lived in a tasteful, manicured home in a wealthy suburb of Portland. He greeted Rossi and her partner at the door with a calm, scholarly air, as if they were simply former students paying their respects. He was retired, a celebrated principal who had shaped thousands of young lives. He was the very picture of civic virtue. He sat them down in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books, and listened to their questions with an expression of patient curiosity. When Rossi finally mentioned the diary, Finch's polite smile didn't waver, but the narrator could see a subtle change. A stillness took hold of him. The warmth in his eyes receded, replaced by something cold and analytical. A diary, he mused, steepling his fingers. How tragic for the family to have old wounds reopened. Yes, of course I remember Jenna. A brilliant girl. I was her mentor. I tried to encourage her talent. Your mentorship, Rossi said, her tone level. Did it often involve meeting her alone after school? A teacher's job doesn't end when the bell rings, Detective, Finch countered smoothly. Gifted students require extra attention. I did what any dedicated educator would have done. He was a fortress of condescending charm, his every word a carefully placed stone in a wall of denial. While Rossi chipped away at that wall, Chloe was on her own. Archaeological dig. Jenna's room was no longer a shrine, it was a puzzle box. She spent days sifting through every book, every trinket, every piece of paper. In a box in the back of the closet, she found it, a slim volume of poetry by E. Cummings. She remembered Jenna being obsessed with it for a month, and on the inside cover, in elegant faded ink, was an inscription she had never noticed before. To J.P., a mind that outshines the stars. A.F., her breath caught in her throat. A.F., Alistair Finch. It was the first physical object that tied him to the secret life Jenna described in her diary. It was the proof his relationship with her sister was far more personal than he claimed. She photographed the inscription and sent it to Rossi immediately. At State Police Headquarters, Rossi's team was diving deep into the school's archives, a world of paper records and grainy microfiche. One detective was tasked with pulling campus blueprints and work orders from 1998. It was a hard, tedious, painstaking work. But then he found it, a campus map from 1997, and on the far edge of the school grounds, tucked behind the football field, was a small square labeled greenhouse, a structure that no longer existed. Rossi felt a jolt. She cross-referenced the map with the last entry in Jenna's diary. "Keep digging," Rossi commanded her team. "Find out what happened to that building." An hour later, the young detective returned to her desk, a single sheet of paper in his hand. His face was pale. "You're not going to believe this," he said. The document was a standard municipal work order. The request was for the complete demolition and paving of the greenhouse structure, citing disuse and safety concerns. Rossi's eyes scanned straight to the bottom of the page. The authorizing signature belonged to Alistair Finch, who, in addition to teaching, had been the head of the campus planning committee, and the date the request was signed and submitted was May 31st, 1998. 1 week after Jenna Peterson disappeared. It was the aha moment, the keystone. This wasn't just a lie of omission anymore. This was a calculated act of destruction. Finch hadn't just silenced Jenna, he had erased the crime scene itself. Armed with this, Rossi made one more call. She tracked down the student who had mentioned Finch's obsession back in 1998. The woman was now a corporate lawyer in Seattle. At first, she was hesitant, the memory of that time still unsettling. She remembered the fear, the rumors, the way the whole school seemed to be holding its breath. It wasn't just mentorship, the woman finally said, her voice low but clear over the phone. It was possessive, the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching, the way he'd steer her away from her friends in the hallway. We all saw it. We were just kids. We didn't have the words for it then, but I do now. It was predatory. As Rossi hung up the phone, she looked at the evidence board in her office. The smiling yearbook photo of Alistair Finch was in the center. Around it were the threads of his undoing, the diary entry, the poetry book inscription, the witness testimony, and the damning demolition order. The shadow Chloe had felt as a 10-year-old girl was finally taking shape. It had a name, a face, and a history of lies. The chase was over. It was time to bring the monster out of the dark. The final confrontation didn't happen in a dark alley or a dramatic chase. It happened under the cold, fluorescent lights of Interrogation Room 3. Alistair Finch walked in not as a suspect but as an insulted academic, projecting an aura of weary indignation. He still believed he was smarter than everyone else. He still believed his carefully constructed world was impenetrable. He was wrong. Detective Rossi sat across from him at the small metal table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply began to tell him a story, laying out pieces of evidence like photographs on a table. "A book of poetry," she began, sliding a photo of the inscription across to him. "A gift for a special student." Finch scoffed. "I encouraged all my students. It's hardly a crime to nurture talent, Detective." Rossi slid another photo across, a copy of the witness statement. A former student remembers you being possessive of Jenna. She called your behavior predatory. The melodramatic gossip of a child recalled decades later, Finch countered, his voice dripping with disdain. My reputation speaks for itself. He was a wall of polished stone, but Rossi had a hammer. She paused, then slid the final document across the table. It was the work order for the demolition of the greenhouse. His signature was at the bottom, clear and damning. You were very efficient, Mr. Finch, Rossi said, her voice dropping a register. That greenhouse was a campus landmark for 50 years, but just 1 week after Jenna Peterson disappeared, you had it torn down and paved over. Why were you in such a hurry? For the first time, a flicker of genuine panic flashed in Finch's eyes. His composure cracked. He opened his mouth to speak, to formulate another lie, another condescending excuse. But Rossi didn't let him. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. She wrote that you called her your Starlight, Rossi said softly, using the secret pet name from the diary's most intimate pages. She wrote that you told her she was the only one who could understand your constellation of thoughts. Does that sound like the talk of a simple mentor, Alistair? The use of their secret language struck him like a physical blow. It was the one thing he thought was buried forever, the language of his private, twisted world with Jenna. The fortress of his arrogance crumbled, and the monster inside finally showed its face. She was going to ruin me, he spat, his voice suddenly a venomous hiss. After everything I had given her, everything I had taught her. She was brilliant, but she was ungrateful, a child. And then it all came pouring out. The confession was not one of remorse, but of narcissistic rage. He described luring her to the greenhouse after the prom, expecting her to be compliant. But that night, Jenna had found her strength. She told him it was over, that she couldn't keep his secret anymore. She had threatened to tell her parents, to tell the principal. In his mind, she wasn't just ending their relationship. She was threatening to shatter the reflection of himself that he had so carefully curated. He, the brilliant teacher, the beloved mentor, was about to be exposed as a predator. The thought was unbearable. In a fit of narcissistic rage, he put his hands around her neck and silenced her forever. He buried her body under the floorboards of the abandoned greenhouse. Rossi leaned forward. A small, arrogant smile touched Finch's lips. A week later, he signed the order that would entomb Jenna's body forever under a layer of asphalt. While Finch's world was collapsing in the interrogation room, Chloe waited in a small, sterile office down the hall. She had been staring at the same motivational poster on the wall for 2 hours, its cheerful slogan a mockery of the dread coiling in her stomach. Every footstep in the hallway made her jump. Finally, the door opened. It was Detective Rossi. Her face was grim, exhausted, but her eyes were resolute. She didn't need to say a word. Chloe already knew. He confessed to everything, Chloe, Rossi said, her voice soft. The words hung in the air. For 25 years, Chloe's life had been defined by a question mark. Her entire existence had been shaped around a vast, aching void of the unknown. And now, in a single moment, that void was filled. It was filled with a truth so ugly and so violent that it stole the air from her lungs. She didn't cry out. She didn't scream. Her body simply seemed to deflate, as if a quarter-century of tension, of holding her breath, had been released all at once. She folded forward, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake, first in a small tremor, then in a violent, silent sob. It was the sound of a wound that had never been allowed to heal finally breaking open. It was the sound of a lifelong question being answered in the most brutal way imaginable. And it was the sound of a long, terrible chapter, at last, coming to an end. The trial of Alistair Finch was a spectacle of profound betrayal. For weeks, the community of Oak Haven listened as the man they had trusted for decades was revealed as a narcissistic predator. He showed no remorse on the stand, maintaining an air of intellectual superiority, even as his crimes were laid bare for the world to see. The jury needed less than 3 hours to find him guilty on all counts. The judge, citing Finch's absolute lack of humanity and the calculated cruelty of his actions, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The monster who had hidden in plain sight for a quarter of a century would die in a cage. A week later, a quiet and solemn excavation took place on the grounds of Oak Haven High. Under the cold, gray Oregon sky, forensic anthropologists carefully unearthed the remains of Jenna Peterson from the place she had lain for 25 years. The Petersons could finally bring their daughter home. The funeral was small and private, a moment of profound, heartbreaking peace. They buried her next to her grandparents, under an oak tree, her name finally etched in stone, a period at the end of a sentence that had been left unfinished for far too long. In the months that followed, Chloe Peterson began the slow, difficult work of navigating a world without a question mark at its center. The gnawing uncertainty that had defined her was gone, replaced by a horrifying certainty. The grief was different now. It was sharper, more focused. She wasn't just mourning a ghost anymore. She was mourning the 17-year-old girl from the diary, who fought for her freedom and lost. One day, Chloe walked into Jenna's room, the room she had kept as a perfect museum of 1998. But it wasn't a museum anymore. It was just a bedroom. With a deep breath, she began to pack her sister's things into boxes, not to erase her, but to finally free her from being frozen in time. She packed the 90s band posters and the yearbooks, but she kept the slim volume of poetry, placing it on her own bookshelf. She was finally integrating her sister's memory into her own life, moving forward with her, instead of living in her past. The ripples of Jenna's case spread far beyond the Peterson family. The revelation of Finch's predatory behavior sent a shockwave through the community, forcing a painful reckoning. In response, the Oak Haven School District, in partnership with Chloe, established a new sweeping set of policies. It was officially called the Student Protection Mandate, but everyone in town knew it by its real name, Jenna's Rule. It implemented strict regulations on student-teacher interactions, created a confidential and direct reporting system for students, and made consent education mandatory. Jenna's tragic end had become a catalyst for protecting a new generation. Chloe, the quiet girl who grew up in her sister's shadow, had found her voice. She began speaking at school board meetings and parent forums, not as a victim, but as an advocate. Her private pain had been forged into a public purpose. She was no longer just Jenna Peterson's sister. She was her legacy. The story of Jenna Peterson is a powerful reminder that no voice should be silenced forever. Her diary, a secret whispered into its pages and buried for decades, ultimately shouted a truth so loud it brought a monster to justice. If you believe that stories of perseverance and justice deserve to be heard, help our channel grow. We'd love to know from which city you're watching.